Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to chair the second afternoon session and the last one for today. I am Raphael Vago from Tel Aviv University. Usually the last panel in such a conference is a very punishing or punished one, because we are supposed to pay for the sins of the others. If there is something goes wrong with the timetable, we are the ones who have to catch up and finish earlier, because people looking at their watches is the last session and they want to go home, etc., etc. But this conference goes on perfect timing since yesterday. So we have time, maximum 7:30, maximum 7:30. If we shall finish before, it will be for our and your benefit, of course. We have an excellent panel, and I'm sure there will be questions, discussions, which we would like to encourage, of course. I will present each of the presenters by their turn. The first one is Dr. Gunther Jikeli, who received his PhD at the Center for Research on Antisemitism at the Technical University in Berlin. He's currently, and we're very glad for it, a postdoctoral fellow at the Kantor Center for the Study of Contemporary European Jewry at Tel Aviv University. And between us, Gunther, when Ronit mentions your name, she always says, our Gunther. So you are our Gunther by now. I don't know after if the postdoc will be over how we shall call you, our Gunther, but you will remain forever our Gunther, of course. From 2011 to 2012, he was advisor at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE and ODIHR, which is the abbreviation of the Organization for Human Rights Advisor on Combating Antisemitism. He is associated with the International Institute for Education and Research on Antisemitism and the Groupe Société Religions Laïcité, the CNRS in Paris. He recently published, and excuse me for not trying to pronounce it in German, I will say the name of the book in English, Antisemitism and Experiences of Discrimination Among Young Muslims in Europe, 2012. It will be published in English with Indiana University Press and with Joel Aloush Benayoun, editors, Perceptions of the Holocaust in Europe and Muslim Communities. Gunther will speak now about anti-Semitism in the extreme right and radical Islamic circles. Please, Gunther.
Toda Rabba. Thank you very much for having me here and for declaring me that I'm your Gunther. I'm very happy about this, of course. Thank you. I will speak about anti-Semitism in the extreme right and radical Islamist circles. I think nobody here will be surprised to hear that, yes, anti-Semitism is deeply rooted both in the extreme right and among Islamists, radical or moderate. I would even argue that the extreme right and Islamists need anti-Semitism in their worldviews. And yes, we have ample proof for the deeply enrooted anti-Semitism in the history of these movements and in their ideologies. And Professor Lars Rinsman, speaking here also in this panel, has written about this regarding the radical right, as I think you term it. And others have made some efforts to explain the anti-Semitism of Islamist movements. We can also observe anti-Semitism in the current attitudes and actions of both movements in Germany. And I will focus on this here tonight. I'll give you a very brief overview of the extreme right and Islamists in Germany today. And I will discuss some of their anti-Semitic views and some trends I see. We will see that both movements have some things in common, but their differences are much greater and they hardly ever cooperate. But before I go into the details, let me just say some words about the terminology and the title of my talk. The extreme right and radical Islamists are by definition fringes of society. However, particularly when it comes to the extreme right, and this is true also to some extent with regard to radical Islamists, the relation between the fringes and the mainstream is complicated. It has been argued that this form of externalization belittles the problems within the wider society, and I think we can develop this a little bit later with your talk, Professor Schwarz-Fresel, we will see. Unfortunately, attitudes that are considered to be extremely rightist are widespread in mainstream society. The latest survey by Brader and Decker from 2012 found that 9% in Germany, 9%, that means more than 7 million Germans, do have what they call a closed extreme right worldview. And many ordinary, well, they say they have a worldview which is hardened from the extreme right. They respond to a lot of items they consider as part and parcel of the extreme right. There's in German you say ein geschlossenes rechtsextremes Weltbild. And in this survey, many more, it showed that many more ordinary Germans agree with some of the extreme rightist statements they have been asked to comment in that survey. This shows that the boundaries between mainstream and the extreme right are not as clear as what one might think or wish. Let me start with an overview of the extreme right in Germany. What is the extreme right? Keeping the shortcomings of this term in mind, I use it to describe a group of individuals and organizations that harbor hardened anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic, authoritarian, and social Darwinist beliefs and attitudes of inequality. An extreme rightist worldview includes that a person's value is determined by race and nation. Authoritarian views about the state and the natural social order of society and the world in general are also part and parcel of the extreme rightist worldviews, as well as the rejection of the current democratic system in Germany. What is their impact and how many are they? How do they operate? In the last decade, the German authorities registered each year between 1,200 and 1,600 anti-Semitic crimes, which they attribute to the extreme right, and between 30 and 60 cases of anti-Semitic violence each year. Between 90 to 95% of all registered anti-Semitic crimes have been attributed to the extreme right, and about 80% of the violent anti-Semitic acts. And today there are a little bit more than 20,000 people affiliated to organizations of the extreme right. About half of them are ready to use violence, according to the German authorities. The organized and active extreme right is thereby relatively small, but they operate in an environment where attitudes of the extreme right are no exceptions. And I just want to relate to this survey, but there are other surveys showing the same results. I think it is worth noting that the percentage of people with extreme rightist views is currently higher in the East than in the West. And contrary to common beliefs, this is a rather recent phenomenon. Interestingly, there are opposing trends in West and East Germany. While the percentage is slightly decreasing in the West over the past 10 years, it has been on the increase in the East over the past 10 years. The German authorities obviously closely observe the extreme right and their organizations. For the year 2011, they list 225 organizations of the extreme right, 6,000 neo-Nazis, 6,300 members of the NPD, the National Democratic Party of Germany. And some organizations of the extreme right promote violence openly and incite hatred, while others, such as the NPD, try to avoid illegal activities and statements. The few, such as the NSU, we just heard in the previous session, have formed armed terrorist groups, and as we heard, they killed 9 people between 2006 and 2006, 9 people with migrant background. What are the main activities and how does the extreme right operate? The extreme right's main activities are rallies, manifestations, publications, and music subculture is also a very important part of their activities. And some, as the NPD, participate in democratic elections. The political manifestation as a very central part serve as a demonstration of strength, both internally and externally. In 2011, there were 167 neo-Nazi rallies. The rallies focused on a number of issues: state repression, political enemies, Islam, social issues, and as a constant theme, probably maybe the most important theme they have today, the bombardment of German cities during the Second World War and revisionist issues. In other years, solidarity with Palestine has also been a prominent issue. The yearly marches in Dresden and Magdeburg, in remembrance of the bombardment of the cities, are very important for a national mobilization of neo-Nazis. They each attract about up to 1,000 participants every year. And last January, so 3 weeks ago, there was a successful counter-demonstration of about 12,000 people in Magdeburg, and the neo-Nazis had to march in the suburbs instead of the center of Magdeburg. The annual march in Dresden and counter-demonstrations are expected on 13th of February, so the day after tomorrow. 14th now. Okay, 13th, 14th. Another, I think, interesting and major annual event is the National Anti-War Day. National Anti-War Day in Dortmund, organized each year in September by neo-Nazis, is part of a revisionist propaganda about the outbreak of the Second World War. Last year, they were not allowed to hold this rally, but usually they do it every year in September, since a few years. The main publications of the extreme right, official publications in Germany, include the monthly NPD journal Deutsche Stimme, the Nationalzeitung, and a number of websites. The largest one, online portal of the extreme right, altamedia.de, was forced to close down in September last year, and now only operates via Twitter. However, thousands of other neo-Nazi websites are active, particularly regional news portals such as Info, for example, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, run by the NPD, or websites run by local independent neo-Nazi groups. There are also a lot of independent, very small neo-Nazi groups. And they use all kinds of social media and very often video clips to disseminate their propaganda. Children as young as 3 years are targeted, for example, with hateful lullabies. As said, music is important for the extreme right. Music with unambiguous hate messages, including incitement to kill Jews, is widespread. According to some accounts of experts working in schools, most young people in Germany have listened to such music at least once. So it's not a fringe phenomenon as well. Spreading hate music by all means, including distributing CDs in front of schools, is a central part of propaganda of the extreme right. In music, the messages are voiced, I think, most openly and most aggressively. As I said, a few parties of the extreme right have had some successes in regional or local elections. Usually they do not participate in the political process of finding solutions for local or regional problems, but they use their mandate to spread propaganda in the parliaments or in the council. And today, after the union with the DVU, the NPD is the main party of the extreme right. What are the main issues, main themes? What role does anti-Semitism play? What kind of anti-Semitism do we find? I would say that anti-Semitism today is only one of a number of themes of the extreme right and is partly suppressed to avoid legal action. The main issue of the extreme right issues have been shifting over the years. While it was primarily about asylum seekers in the 1990s, I would say the extreme right, they have always responded to current political issues. I would say we can find more or less 5 fields. Firstly, revisionist issues, most prominently German victims in World War II. Secondly, migration, Islam, asylum seekers, multiculturalism, which they all attack. Thirdly, repression from the authorities, police and the justice system. And fourthly, the Jewish lobby and the Jewish lobby in the US and in Germany, and also anti-Zionism. And fifthly, to some extent at least, poverty and other social issues. And of course, they combine these themes very often. And what kind of anti-Semitism do we find? I think this is an interesting question. Well, we find all kinds of anti-Semitism, but secondary anti-Semitism, so to speak, the mixed with revisionism, is most prominent right now. Then we find what is sometimes termed political anti-Semitism, that is conspiracy theories of Jewish lobby in Germany and in the US. We also find anti-Zionism and solidarity with the Palestinians as tropes that have been used for anti-Semitic resentments. Racist anti-Semitism, however, is less common today, even among neo-Nazis. And religious anti-Semitism is marginal. As I said, the extreme right generally avoids blunt anti-Semitic statements in public and uses forms of insinuations that are easily understood in their anti-Semitic intention, but that are not illegal. Codes such as Wall Street, the lobby, US East Coast, high finance, or forces in the back are understood as synonyms for the Jews. I want to give you an example from the former executive of the NPD journal Deutsche Stimme, Henrik Ostendorf. He discussed the strategy of the extreme right between attacks against the system, as he called it, and change through participation. And he said that the national camp should, I quote, be creative and even has to work with the devil if necessary, as long as he is not from Jerusalem. So here Jerusalem stands for the Jews. The NPD works to overthrow democracy in Germany, and they make it clear that the Jews and Israel are the main enemies, worse than the devil here. I found it surprisingly to find an official statement by the NPD on anti-Semitism. And I think we can learn from that. I want to read it for you. I translated it. You can read on their website, is the NPD an anti-Semitic party? It's a quote. How is anti-Semitism defined? Criticism against Jewish pressure groups. We certainly have the right to criticize the loud mouth and the never-ending financial claims of the Central Council of Jews in Germany. Jews are not object to a ban on criticism. We refuse to be blackmailed 60 years after the end of the war by the Holocaust industry, a term coined by the Jew Norman Finkelstein. We refuse to be politically patronized and to be financially squeezed. End of quote from the NPD website. So while they do not openly endorse anti-Semitism here in this statement, they also do not condemn it. They question its definition, and they use tropes of secondary anti-Semitism, putting in a number of keywords and insinuations about Jews, power and money, and also some linguistic references to the Nazis, such as the Jewish Lautmaus, the Großmäuligkeit, in German a term that was often used in Nazi propaganda. And they portray the German people being under attack from the Jews. Another more direct example was published in the German section of the International National Journal, Nationaljournal. This is, I think, a textbook example for both the conspiracy theory and the clearly racist anti-Muslim propaganda. I couldn't resist sharing it with you, although I think this form of racist anti-Semitism is on the decline. So the National Journal stated, I quote, "The lobby, driven by hatred against the Aryans, has lured millions of Muslim masses to Europe to suppress white Europe, and first of all, the Germans." That was published in October 2011. And as I already said, the most blunt and I think shocking verbal forms of anti-Semitism are usually to be found in music. To give you two examples here, the interpret Teja says in his album Rachezeit, translates to Time of Revenge, I quote, "You won't be bothered by doubts anymore, you will be part of the insurgents, we will shatter the Jew tyranny." In another song, I quote, "Are Judah's arts just mockery? Don't give mercy. If you cannot raise the sword, so choke them without fear." So here we have a very blunt and I think very shocking example of anti-Semitism. As we don't have much time, I will continue now with a brief description of anti-Semitism by radical Islamists. Well, let's see if they are a bit more cheerful. What are radical Islamists? We have a similar problem here with the definition, especially when it comes to distinction between radical and moderate Islamists. The influential Muslim Brotherhood, influential in Europe as well, for example, is in Europe on Muslim organizations, for example, is now often considered to be not radical but moderate. But we have witnessed in the last weeks prominent leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, such as the Egyptian president Morsi and also other leading clerics, Qaradawi. They have voiced in the past, and they continue to voice very blunt anti-Semitic statements in public. However, Islamists, radical or moderate, by definition, aim to create a state and society in strict conformity with Islamic doctrine, that is a state where clerics have the last say, not elected representatives of the people. They won't, like the extreme right, another political system. Most Islamists in Germany operate still within the legal borders and reject the use of violence, while others don't. As it is the case with extreme right, anti-Semitism is part and parcel of this movement. From its beginning, we can see that in the early 20th century. Islamists in Germany are influenced by foreign Islamist organizations, but there are also some specific developments in Germany and some dynamics of its own, I would say. As is the case for all European countries, the majority of Islamic organizations is influenced, at least ideologically, by Islamist movements and most prominently by the Muslim Brotherhood. Let me just go very quickly through the main legal Islamist organizations in Germany. The largest Islamist organization in Germany, and also the second largest Muslim organization, is the Islamische Gemeinschaft Milli-Görüş, strongly linked to the Turkish Milli-Görüş with Erbakan as its leader until his death in 2011. His anti-Semitic worldviews are very well documented. The organization is ideologically close to the Muslim Brotherhood, but Milli-Görüş rejects violence clearly, although it has strong links to more radical groups. For instance, it has not severed its links to the anti-Semitic pro-Hamas organization, International Humanitarian Aid Organization, even after the latter was outlawed in Germany after the flotilla affair. Then we have the Verband Islamischer Kulturzentren. This is the third largest, has the third largest membership of Muslim organizations in Germany. And it's anti-Western and anti-Semitic indoctrination, particularly in their school in Bonn, in students' residences. They have been criticized in the German press. Then there's the Zentralrat der Muslime in Deutschland. They have 3 main subgroups among its 19 member organizations. The first, the Union der türkisch-islamischen Kulturvereine in Europa. This is a religious spin-off of the extreme right nationalist Turkish group Grey Wolves, and they have approximately 8,000 members. Then there is a network associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, such as the Islamische Gemeinschaft in Deutschland, and also part of the Zentralrat der Muslime are Iran-oriented Shiite groups. So these legal organizations, I think, should be separated from terror organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, the Kurdish Iraqi Ansar al-Islam, or the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan. The latter publishes, by the way, jihadist propaganda also in German.
You mentioned the number for the third organization.
Yeah.
Do you mention numbers for the largest?
The largest is DITIB, not Islamist. It's difficult to have numbers on the Muslim organizations because membership is not as in Jewish organizations. So I don't have the figures here, but I can look it up and give it to you. But the largest is DITIB. DITIB is very close to the Turkish government, and therefore has a tradition of secularism, which is now a bit changing because of the Turkish government, but it's still very secular in its tradition. And it's a problem because officially, to be recognized as a German association, officially they cannot say that they're in fact a Turkish organization. But you can see that from the people working there that, I mean, this is close to the Turkish government. But DITIB is not an Islamist organization. So these terror organizations, they adding, I think is important here is to add the organization Hizb ut-Tahrir. They have been banned in Germany for its anti-Semitic propaganda, but they still publish the material in German and continue to incite hatred against Jews, Israel, and America. And these Islamist, partly illegal organizations use Germany mainly for fundraising and as an area of retreat. Hezbollah has participated openly in a number of rallies in Germany. You know probably that there's a discussion going on now to ban Hezbollah or not. Hezbollah is active or has been active in Germany. organizing rallies, very often in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the yearly Iranian-led Al-Quds rally, calling for the destruction of Israel. The Hamas has organized international conferences in Germany, using the organization Palestinian Return Center as a forum. The last conference was in 2011 in Wuppertal, with 3,000 3,000 participants, including some German politicians, by the way. The number of Salafists is small but rising. We should distinguish between so-called jihadist Salafists, who endorse violence, and other Salafists who are rather politically active. Some of them have a clear focus on Germany and German society. The German authorities registered 38,000 people who are affiliated to Islamist organizations, 38,000 people. The majority, however, is from the Miligurish, about 30,000 people. And Miligurish is moderate compared to others, of course. And then there's the Muslim Brotherhoods. They have 1,300 supporters, and Hezbollah about 1,000. Salafists, political Salafists, and jihadists together have about 4,000 supporters. Political Salafists, as I said, do not use violence, but they are very active when it comes to disseminating their propaganda. And some of you might know Pierre Vogel. He's a Muslim convert, one of the most prominent Salafists in Germany. And Salafists are also very active on the internet. They have numerous websites and disseminate countless videos on YouTube. And you can also meet Salafists on the in pedestrian zones across Germany. And last year, the Salafist organization, the Real Islam, they call themselves, they became prominent when they distributed hundreds of thousands of copies of the Quran for free. And one of its leaders, Ibrahim Abu Nagi, he insisted that Jews and Christians are damned and that coexistence with them is no option. And that was in the news and caused a debate. Ideologically, radical Islamists see themselves at war against Zionists and Crusaders. That means Jews and the Western world. The direct threat for security in Germany caused by Islamists became evident in 2002. Back then, the German authorities arrested members of the terrorist group El Tawhid, who were planning a terrorist attack against the Jewish community center in Berlin and against Jewish restaurants in Düsseldorf. But the first really successful act of terrorism on German territory by Islamists was the killing of 2 US soldiers in 2011, in March. The German authorities closely observe at least 225 radical Islamists who have received military training abroad or who intend to do so. And as we have seen in France, it is very important to closely observe them. How do Islamists operate in Germany? What do they do? The main fields are still religious activities and religious education. Some organize political manifestations and also produce and disseminate a number of publications. So the main issues are still religious issues. Some see it as a duty to spread Islam, to do dawah. International political issues are also discussed, such as the so-called Arab Spring, and very often the war in Afghanistan, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Islamist prisoners, and also conspiracy theories about Zionists and Crusaders. And I think the perception of a global war against Muslims is widespread among Islamists, and often in this very context, the perception that there's an ongoing war against Muslims globally. In this context, anti-Semitism is very often voiced. Unfortunately, there are no comprehensive studies what goes on in mosques and schools and seminars that are run by Islamist organizations. But there have been a number of journalist reports that indicate that these places are often used for indoctrination of a very restrictive form of Islam, and sometimes for incitement to hatred against Jews, Christians, and homosexuals in particular. In Islamic book fairs by Milli Görisch, for example, anti-Semitic films and literature such as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, or books by Holocaust denier Roger Garodi, or even Henry Ford's Eternal Jew have been found. I think I don't have time to go to the publications. I have 3 minutes, but I want to share one quote with you. I think this is very interesting also when we compare the extreme right and Islamists. There are a number of websites, and some of the websites are in German. There is one prominent website called the Muslimmarkt. And interestingly, they also have something to say on anti-Semitism, I found. And they also make some use of Mr. Finkelstein in their writing. So please let me just give this quote. You can read there on their website, "Today the term anti-Semite is also used against people who dare to criticize Israel's brutal and inhumane policies," and to put Israel in quotation marks. "In most cases, criticism is voiced against the brutality of a regime of occupation and has nothing to do with racism. What is more, Arabs are also Semites. Therefore, an Arab can hardly be anti-Semitic. Besides, many of the Jews' prophets are highly appreciated and honored in the Holy Quran. For example, Zacharias, John, David, Solomon, Moses, Aaron, and not least Jesus and Maria, who are descendants of the Jewish tribe of Ali Imran. The aforementioned reasons show that not the term anti-Semitism but anti-Zionism is the appropriate term to rightly condemn the oppression and the Zionist racism. The person of Jewish faith, Finkelstein, himself has expressed his fundamental criticism against Zionist financial practices and his publications, and now he has to defend himself against the allegations of anti-Semitism." End of quote. So what I find here very interesting is this statement on an Islamist website. First of all, they question the definition of anti-Semitism. They honor Judaism before Islam. Yeah? I think we have to stress that before Islam. That means Jews and also Christians who stick to their beliefs are condemned, as we have seen with Ibrahim Abu Nagi and his organization, the Real Islam. And also, we see here they focus on anti-Zionist forms of anti-Semitism, sparked with classic forms of anti-Semitism in the terms of allegedly Zionist financial practices, as they put it here. So, both the extreme right, I come to my end, and Islamists are deeply anti-Semitic by the main focus, but the main focus currently are not the Jewish communities in Germany. They both pose, however, a direct threat to the Jewish communities in Germany. Most anti-Semitic crimes are committed by the extreme right, including street violence. Islamists are usually not involved in street violence against Jews. There are attacks against Jews by some young Muslims, but these Muslims are usually not members of Islamist groups. However, the terrorist threat against Jewish communities comes from both extreme right and Islamists. And as you have seen, I think it's very interesting to note that even the extreme right, they do use racist form of anti-Semitism. It's not their main thing anymore. And while the extreme right focuses on revisionism, Islamists primarily use anti-Zionism and also some religious form of Jew hatred. They both can use Finkelstein for their purposes. So I think I will finish here. Thank you very much. I think it was a bit longer, but I hope
Thank you very much.
you